Well, when Kash Patel finally gets in as the FBI director, and Lord, I pray that he gets in and confirmed as the FBI director. But when he does, the American people are going to find out the biggest story of the decade, if not the century. And I'm talking about the January 6th bomber and all the corruption and hiding that has been going on with the bomber at the FBI. Quite frankly and personally, I believe that the J6 bomber was an inside job. That is why many people at the FBI have been told to keep it quiet. All the details surrounding it. And just to be frank, Donald Trump opened up a can of freaking worms by pardoning the January 6ers, because now that all these January 6ers are out, and by the way, some of them are not, they're still being held hostage disregarding the pardon, right? People who have been pardoned are still being held, according to what I am hearing, and I'm going to discuss some of that today. But Donald Trump has opened that can of worms, and now these people can come out and say the real things that happened on January 6th. And I believe there is so much more to the story than what they're letting on. Now, before I dive into that, and you're going to want to hear this, trust me on that, just a quick break from my sponsor. Well, have you ever wondered what happened to the legendary Chuck Norris? Well, I saw a video of him the other day and I was completely shocked. I mean, the man is literally in his 80s. He is working out, kicking butt, and more active than ever. In fact, what stood out to me is that he seemed stronger than he's ever been. He works out longer and he had lots and lots of energy. And I thought to myself, I want to be like him when I'm his age. So what the heck is he doing that is changing his lifestyle, right? So he claims that he did this by making one change in his life. And I want to encourage you guys to check out that change. And in order to check it out, all you have to do is go to chuckdefense.com/haven to find out what that change is. And I have to tell you, I found out what that change was, and it made a huge difference in my life. And I honestly believe that it will make a huge difference in your life. This is why I've sponsored with them. But you can check it out at chuckdefense.com/haven. And if you want more information, you can click the link in the description box below to watch the video, or if you're on the cell phone, click that more button. But trust me, you're going to want to check this out. Go to chuckdefense.com/haven. All right, back to the broadcast. So let's dive in. I want to first go forward to the new information that has been dropped, and how Donald Trump and his administration, people within his administration and his circle, are now going to investigate how the January 6ers were basically mistreated by the court system, right? But for starters, let's do a flashback with this interview that happened with Matt Gaetz. Take a listen.
You recently met with Capitol Police.
Correct. Today.
And what did you learn in that meeting?
I learned that backpack guy, January 6th backpack guy, not to be confused with January 5th backpack person. Backpack guy was a non-uniform, plainclothes police officer in the employ of the Capitol Hill Police.
The person who found the pipe bomb, the person who, D'Antuono, who was leading the investigation, say, oh yeah, the person who found it, it'd be investigation 101, that they would be a suspect initially until ruled out. You're saying that person was an undercover, plainclothes Capitol Police officer, and the Capitol Police confirmed that to you today?
They confirmed that to me today, yes.
Now that's huge. That was released almost a year ago by Matt Gaetz, and he's talking to Thomas Massie there, right? And Thomas Massie says, hey, the guy who discovered the bomb, and this is just a reminder for you guys, because you already knew this if you've been following me on Restricted Republic. It's just a reminder that the guy in plain clothes was a Capitol Police officer in plain clothes, which Matt Gaetz says is also, quote unquote, a suspect, right? And keep in mind, that's interesting, right? Because all of these pieces go together. And then also all this footage was coming out as well. If you look at some of the footage here, this is the footage right where the park where that bomb had been laid. And you can see they were notified of the bomb. The guy comes in, tells them of the bomb, and they act like nothing, no big deal, which Which, okay, if you're a Capitol Police officer or a Secret Service officer, you're not supposed to make a big deal if there's a bomb nearby, so you can get people out of the area very calmly. The problem is, if you scroll up a little more, right, you start see people going right along, and these are children, by the way, crossing the street right here. Right around this bomb, if it was a real threat, right, they wouldn't be allowing these children to cross the street. So there's a bunch of questionable things happening regarding this J6 bomber, right? Things that we've talked about here on my channel, just quick reminders. And then there's also this, of course, at the Daily Wire. Again, I want to go fast through these reminders. FBI tied January 6th pipe bomber to Metro card of ex-government official, but of course, they blocked the interview of him. And as a reminder, Kyle Seraphin, who led FBI surveillance team, told the Daily Wire that shortly after J6, a counterintelligence team met him at a firehouse in Falls Church, Virginia, to bring him on his next surveillance target. They had used security footage to follow the person into a metro station after he planted the bombs and identified the fare card that was used. The fare card allowed them to determine that the person got off at a metro stop in Northern Virginia, where surveillance footage showed the person entering a car. Both the car and the fare card were in the name of the same person, a retired Air Force Chief Master Sergeant who was now working as a contractor with a security clearance, they said. Seraphin and his team were assigned to stake out the person's Rose house for days, but the FBI blocked his request to interview the person. He said, then they were called off the target completely and told to pour through low priority leads about minor J6 participants. Instead of focusing on the J6 bomber, Kyle Seraphin, why don't you just go focus on the little minor things, like the J6ers themselves who just walked around the building? They're obviously hiding something. You guys know that. You've been watching my channel for the whole since I've been here. You guys have been watching this. They have something to hide. Why else would you say, we're going to pull you off of that? We don't want to know. We don't need more information, because I believe it was an inside job. Biggest story of the freaking century, if that is the case. And I can't wait till Kash Patel tells us the truth, because look, even the J6 committee refused to investigate the pipe bomber. Oh, we don't know nothing about that. Look, Kamala Harris could have gotten bombed and killed, and you don't think that's a topic that we should be looking at? Kind of weird, right? This is why I think the bombs are going to drop, metaphorically speaking, on the American people. And here's another caveat, and this just happened just recently, right? Take a look at this. And this is the Epic Times. U.S. prosecutor, opens probe of DOJ January 6 cases. This particular prosecutor says, you know what? All these January 6ers, a bunch of them have been overly prosecuted using certain prosecutions that should never have happened on these J6ers. And I'm going to look into it because I know there's corruption. And by the way, if you wanted to hide something before I get into this article, wouldn't you try to round up and arrest people who might have inside knowledge of what happened, because you want to share a fake narrative, calling it an insurrection that wasn't. There was no guns. There were no police officers killed the day of January 6th. And you can't tell me that all these police officers committed suicide after the fact because of a riot. I think there's more to the story, but this is happening right now under the Trump administration because I believe Donald Trump really wants to get to the bottom of it. So now we have a prosecutor going after these people and investigating what happened with the J6ers, right? And here's what it says. A U.S. prosecutor said on January 27th that he's investigating why federal prosecutors brought a felony obstruction charge against hundreds of people involved in the J6 breach of the Capitol. Ed Martin, an interim U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, in an internal email ordered a review of the matter, and he directed employees to hand over files, emails, and documents. It goes on. Section 1512 of the U.S. Code prohibits people from obstructing, influence, impeding any official proceeding, or attempting to do so. It carries a prison term of up to 20 years. And by the way, this was the section of code that they were using against the January 6ers that is now being investigated. But it goes on. Prosecutors with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington charged about 260 people who were in and around the Capitol on J6 with obstructing an official proceeding. Former police officer Joseph Fisher, one of the accused, challenged the charge in court that led to a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that concluded prosecutors were interpreting the law too broadly, and they were. On government's theory, Section 1512 consists of a granular subsection C1 focused on obstruction, acts that impair evidence, and an overreaching subsection that reaches all other obstruction. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote for the majority, even setting surplusage aid, that novel interpretation would criminalize a broad swath of prosaic conduct, exposing activists and lobbyists alike to decades in prison. Before Trump took office, the government dropped the charge conveniently and asked the courts to vacate the charge against most of the defendants and convicts. So the Supreme Court says, hey, you're using that wrongly. And now we have a U.S. prosecutor opening up a probe as to why that happened. Now, here's the next piece of the puzzle. Why? Right? Why even use that in the first place? Well, because they wanted to create the idea of an insurrection that wasn't an insurrection. And again, this is the biggest story of the century, especially when you put it all together, because they lied, they convoluted, and here's the other key. They prosecuted, tortured, at least from what I'm hearing on some of these reports about the January 6ers, they really mistreated them in prison. In fact, there are so many stories about what happened with these, and I'm just going to show you a couple of stories, right? The first one here, this is on the Gateway Pundit. Indiana, and okay, well, let me start with this story, and then I'm going to go back to that one. Here, let's start with this one. And this is also on the Gateway Pundit. Roger Stone, the incarceration of pardoned J6er Jeremy Brown is a travesty, and it absolutely is. But here's what the article goes on to detail. Jeremy Brown, a retired U.S. Army Special Force Master Sergeant, is being denied his freedom due to the decision by rogue federal agents to keep him in prison in direct opposition to President Donald Trump's blanket pardon of J6 patriots. The feds are hoping to exploit a technicality as their unlawful raids eventually resulted in federal felony charges against Brown in Florida. They split his charges into two separate federal jurisdictions, one in Florida, one in Washington, D.C. Although the D.C. charges have been removed due to Trump's pardon, the feds maintain that Brown's Florida conviction in federal court on weapons charges remains intact. So his one in Florida remains intact. But what did Jeremy Brown do? Why is he in there? And this is a very, very important story, right? But here's what it says about his actual story. And it says, Brown joined the Oath Keepers in the fall of 2020 and was approached by DHS in Tampa to become an informant. Brown refused to stab his patriotic brothers in the back, turning the agents down while legally recording his meeting to protect himself and his reputation, which personally I would do too. After he released the audio publicly of the agents trying to coerce him into becoming an informant, Brown was targeted shortly thereafter with a raid on his home, despite his peaceful behavior at the January 6th rally outside of Congress. On J6, Brown went to Washington, D.C. for the Save the America rally at the Eclipse to provide security during lawful, permitted rallies near the Capitol, as was requested by a rally speaker. Brown committed zero violence, no violence, and was a model citizen during the January 6th protest. Brown never entered the premises of the Capitol building and even saved a woman from being trampled after she was pushed to the ground by Capitol Police instigators attempting to clear a terrorist area with brute force. Nevertheless, at the end of September 21, Brown was arrested and his residence was searched under the unlawful search warrant signed by a DC magistrate for 2 misdemeanor charges using the out of jurisdiction pretext of terrorism. So they targeted him because he refused to go along with their agenda, and now they're refusing to release him on the pardon. That is one story of many. Here's another one, and I'm not going to get too much in detail. J6er Barry Ramey pardoned, but he's been held hostage by a halfway house that helped rebuild life during destroyed by DOJ and BOP. So he's got a story as well, but there are more stories of January 6ers being held or not being released when they should have been released. And they're just playing this game. And some obviously have, but some, according to what I'm hearing, have still not been released, regardless of the pardon. Right, and then there's this little twist, and kind of throw this up there. Indiana police refuses Freedom of Information Request Act for video evidence in shooting of a January 6th Patriot by sheriff's deputy. Now, I don't want to get into the details, but basically they're not releasing any information from the sheriff's department. He was pulled over on some kind of traffic issue, and the police officer shot and killed him. We don't know any other details besides that. But it's interesting. This is a January 6er who, by the way, as far as I know, this, and I'm going to just throw it back up there because I had it highlighted and it unhighlighted, but there it is. His only crime was that he walked through the Capitol on January 6th, and now he's dead. They're not giving us the information because it's still being looked at. Is there more to the story? I don't know. I got to wait for the information to come out. But what I do know, stories from the likes of Jeremy Brown and Barry Ramey, there's many others. And a lot of these stories are starting to surface. And there were stories about these J6ers as well, rumors, stories, whatever, that they were trying to talk, that these agents were trying to talk them into a guilty plea in order to give them lighter sentences, which a lot of people would take that, guilty or not, which is why Donald Trump did the right thing. And he's opened up a freaking can of worms, a good can of worms that needed to be open. And I believe that this story is about to be flipped upside down to the American people, but we got to get Kash Patel in. Please make sure. I'm going to have you do a call to action. Call all of your congressional leaders. Let them know, especially the avid, the mass offenders like Mitch McConnell and Liz Murkowski. We need to make sure that these people, and Lindsey Graham, I think were ones that were like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. We need to primary these people if they don't go through with these Donald Trump picks. And I think we really need to take that into consideration. Anyhow, wanted to give you all the information on that. And by the way, I wanted to give you an update because Donald Trump finally told us what the drones are, and I was half right? And here it is. White House clarifies DroneGate, New Jersey UAPs authorized by the FAA for research purposes. In other words, purposes, but the Federal Aviation Administration basically was flying these drones for research and various other reasons. So it was us all along, just like I said. I said it was China or foreign influence as well as ourselves. At least they're telling us it wasn't not foreign influence. It was the FAA doing research along with everyday people just flying their own drones, so I was half right. Thank God it's not the foreign. Hopefully they're telling us the truth still. But either way, why wouldn't the Biden administration tell us what it is, right? Why keep that from the American people? Oh, I know. Because at that same time, they were trying to put legislation in regarding the drone, which I brought up in my channel. I said, oh, it's coincidence that right at this time they're trying to put this drone legislation through. And boom, here we have the FAA flying all these drones in the sky for research purposes. The Biden administration says, I don't know what they are, but they're not dangerous. and coincidentally, right around the time they wanted to pass the bill. So I was right regarding the bill. So it had everything to do with the bill, in my opinion. And Joe Biden wanted to pretend like he didn't know what was going on. Thank God we got an actual president in charge who doesn't play games. Anyhow, with that, I want to encourage you, get to restrictedrepublic.com. Justice Knight just put out a huge report today. And it's uploading right now regarding TikTok and what's going on. They're issuing threats and death threats. You're going to want to see it. Very sensitive information. So we're bringing it only to restrictedrepublic.com. Sign up now. Use the coupon code Lisa and the number 5 to get it for $5 per month. I really hope to see you there. That is where you're going to get the nitty gritty. And by the way, all our content that I post here on YouTube is also there, commercial free. But that's one huge way you can support us for $5 a month. Anyhow, I love you all. I'm Lisa Haven, signing out.